Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's just us again, Mike and I, coming at you live for our webinar topic, Is Your Feedback Effective? Actually, we do have an additional person this time. We asked for our friend Jack Leticia to join us. I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a little bit because I don't want to miss anything important about her or her expertise and about her current seat at Titus. I also don't want to pronounce her name wrong because I think I've said it wrong for so long. She corrected me and I still don't think I have it right, but I am trying, Jack. I am trying.
That's okay. I understand.
Got it. And then just in case you haven't been part of our Feedback as a Gift series, my name is Raina Fryer. I'm Senior Director of People and Learning here at Titus Talent Strategies. I have 20 plus years in the people component of the business. I spent majority of my time in learning and development. I'm still doing that today. And then I decided to foray into the traditional side of HR. I've been with Titus for 3 years, and I'm so excited to be part of this amazing company, especially if you haven't seen it, you should go check us out on LinkedIn because we have just released our new brand. It's beautiful. I'm very excited that we put our stake in quality. We are the quality one. So speaking of brand, I love a good transition. I've been known for speaking on the topic of feedback, starting with Courageous Candor a few years back, and I feel like I cannot escape it. So, which is fine because today is really about feedback being the cornerstone of growth, both giving it, receiving it, and helping us to achieve positive interpersonal relationships that are really focused on how we can be the best version of ourselves. But before we dive into that topic, of course, I would love for Mike to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Raina. Well, my name is Mike Kinsey. I'm our Regional Vice President of our Talent Optimization team, which is filled with some of my very favorite people, unbelievably talented people on our team. And our goal is to help our partners maximize the potential of each of their people. That's the easiest way I can say that, the fancy talent optimization definition, but maximizing people and their potential. We do that through coaching, through training, and through leveraging a lot of different tools, one being the predictive index, which you've probably heard of before. We might name drop that a couple of times, which is our behavioral and cognitive assessment, which is really helpful when it comes to giving and receiving feedback and knowing if it's effective. I'm really honored to be here today, especially alongside Jacqueline Letizia, who's definitely a role model for me when it comes to giving feedback and making sure that it's effective. So Jacqueline, introduce yourself. I'm excited to do this with you today.
Well, thanks, Mike. A role model, Mike. Oh, the pressure is on. I'm Jacqueline, otherwise known as Jack, and I'm a Director of Operations for our EOS region here at Titus. And what does that mean? It means that I spend most of my time client-facing with business owners and stakeholders, working out things, all talent strategy issues, recruitment. And so a lot of my conversations with the stakeholders is around areas that we have to address. And it can be some very, sensitive conversations when we're trying to tell somebody who runs a business that maybe their strategic plan that they always have used isn't going to work in this market, or maybe their expectations are a bit unrealistic. So while I have that facet of the role, I also manage a team of recruiters. And with direct reports, there's always a plethora of topics and sometimes sensitive issues that need to be addressed. So what I want to say is that before I joined Titus, I would give myself a 5 when it comes to effective feedback. I worked at a company that the feedback was, just keep doing what you're doing. It's fine. Everything's great. And just kind of bury it and deal with it later. So by coming here and learning some of these things that we're going to talk about today, it's just been such an uplifting, welcome change. And I really value what we're going to discuss here. So if you're not comfortable with giving feedback, that's okay. But we'll put your team in a tougher spot, if you avoid it. So let's talk about how to make it better.
Great introduction, Jack. Thank you for sharing that. Jack told me some stories of previous places she's worked, and it is a little bit scary to think that if you're not giving people feedback, they really can't grow, or if you're burying things for the sake of not having that difficult, uncomfortable moment, that's going to actually set people up for failure later on. So thanks for sharing that bit of your history. While the audience is muted for the sake of us not receiving live feedback while we're doing this together today, we do want you to interact with the chat feature. A lot of the people who come to our courses really take advantage of networking through the Titus events. So if you want to put your name, location, company role, if you like long walks on the beach at sunset, anything you want to share with us, we'd love to know about you today. And also, while it's hard to host the webinar and watch the chat, we have a great team available that's going to help us if we do have any questions or comments to share throughout the webinar. So feel free to pop things in as you're thinking about them. If a question you pop in is relevant to the slide we're on, we'll certainly address it, or we may answer it at the end if it makes more sense to do it there, if we're going to be covering that topic later on in a slide. I'm just going to wait for people to put a few things in the chat just to see where we're at across the hopefully nation, which is representative of our customer base as well. Jack, where are you sitting today, since we are a 100% mobile work organization?
Absolutely. I was getting ready to type it in the chat. I am in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's a booming place, let me tell you. It's my hometown. Have been in Indiana my whole life, but have traveled all over the place. But I am the only Titus person in Fort Wayne, so I do get a little lonely.
Aww. Mike, and you are sitting?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Very nice.
The frozen tundra.
Like how Mike and I both say Milwaukee just to keep it simple, because we're not in Milwaukee, but nobody would know where we are. So we just say Milwaukee.
Raina, I have to pause. We have a Stephanie in Fort Wayne.
See?
Stephanie.
Hey.
You're not all alone, Jack. You're not all
Not
alone.
awesome.
All right. Well, thank you all for putting your information in the chat. It's great to have you all here. And as I said before, this is really part of a series. So you've seen Mike and I before. Jack is new to the conversation, but we want to do a quick recap of the previous 2 sessions. And even if you haven't been to those sessions, your attendance today is really nice because this topic stands all on its own. This could be an hour, 2-hour-long topic all on its own.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot of components to this. I mean, giving feedback, it seems so easy. Like asking for feedback, what's the big deal? It is a big deal. There's a lot of nuances in there that we have to ensure that we're asking for the right kind of feedback. And so when you look at the series that we've done, how to ask for it, receiving criticism, not easy to do, but making sure that you're digging deeper and not being defensive within that. And then is your feedback effective? I would definitely recommend that you go on YouTube and check out these if you've missed them before. Raina, where do we find those specifically? You know?
You can actually go to the Titus YouTube channel. So you're going to see all of our information, all of our previous videos, podcasts that we have recorded. So everything will be on that YouTube channel.
Nice. Okay. Well, just to bring it back to the feedback, I was really fortunate to be raised by parents that gave me a lot of words of affirmation. I really love that about them. And I do the same thing to my kids right now. And maybe for better or for worse, because I did love this, but it was really difficult for me to then go into the harsh reality that I was not perfect and that everything that I was doing was not always good. I was not always good at it. And so I had believed that so strongly that it really carried on a lot. Even early into my career, I really saw feedback as a weakness. If I was getting constructive feedback, I would rather hold on to the compliments versus the constructive feedback and kind of brush the feedback or the input aside from my managers and from my peers. And then I'd always wonder why my peers were passing me up for promotions. I think a lot of it was I wasn't taking the constructive feedback and running with it. I had convinced myself that I was good at what I was doing, and that doesn't necessarily equate to what we were trying to accomplish today with the webinar.
And I think in Mike's situation, as he talks about how that's changed throughout his career, he's saying that he wants feedback now. And I think that's what the research is really telling us. Our people want more feedback. And while I'm not a big fan of reading exactly what's on a slide, and I just like to use these slides as a backdrop to the conversation, we are going to have a really big problem on our hands if we know that 80% of our employees say they want more feedback. 44% of managers feel uncomfortable giving it because so few people feel equipped to give it effectively.
Yeah, one of the reasons our employees actually want feedback is to grow personally and professionally. And so, I think one of the areas that's really, really hard is that you can give feedback and it can have negative consequences on people. And a lot of those are demotivating to employees. So when feedback isn't given with constructive guidance, you're going to actually demotivate and do the opposite of what your intention maybe was when giving that feedback. So the other area is reducing productivity. If you want people to be less productive in their role, make sure that you're giving them poor feedback. That's the number one way to do that. There's performance improvement, and then there's decreased innovation. So making people that are maybe afraid to take risks based on the feedback that you provide. I know that creating a culture of feedback doesn't only mean giving constructive feedback, but I know that I've overcompensated both ways. If I've been too harsh on someone, I give them the fluff sandwich where I'm giving them only compliments, and they're like, was he actually disciplining me, or was that a compliment? It's really hard to tell, versus the person that only wants to give constructive feedback and it feels like you can never do anything right. So the balance is making sure that you are giving feedback with care and with honesty, and that's going to lead to trust over time.
Perfect. And Mike's given away the training right now because care happens to be one of our 4 C's. So Jack, I'd love for you to jump in here and talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we're going to recommend for delivering feedback in a way that is well received and hopefully leads to those positive outcomes by just sharing our 4 C's.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. So as you can see, we're going to have the 4 C's here up on the screen: curiosity, clarity, care, and challenge. But before we jump into what they all mean and how we apply them, I want to tell you a little story about a manager named Mr. Thompson. And while I'm telling you this story, I want to give you a little interactive assignment. So there's no wrong answer. When you hear this story, please definitely chime in on what Mr. Thompson did right or not so right. So could be a trick question, but throw it in the chat. Don't hold back. I want to hear what you guys are thinking. So let me paint this picture for you. There was once upon a time a little manager in training named Jacqueline, and she worked as an assistant for the top performer in the company named Mr. Thompson. Jacqueline worked tirelessly for him and for his customers, and we made sure everyone was happy and serviced well. Mr. Thompson kept pouring on the work. Everybody was happy. Jacqueline welcomed it. Business was booming. But then one day, Mr. Thompson asked Jacqueline to sit down with him. Mr. Thompson sat behind his desk. His face was really stern, and he wasted no time getting straight to the point. Jacqueline, he began, your work lately has been less than unimpressive. I would not have handled this like that, nor does it look anything like I want it to. And there's all these orders that need to be processed. What have you been doing all day? So he continued to list all of her shortcomings without offering any constructive advice at all. Jacqueline felt increasingly demoralized, and he concluded with this: you need to step up or you may not have a future here. And he simply dismissed her and sent her on the way with a heavy heart and a major sense of frustration. So, looks like we have had a certain kind of manager that maybe isn't exactly how we want to be managing people. And Raina, good point, being called into an office and just basically not knowing what's going on. There's been no communication, right? Except for this one instance. And so letting somebody know that that's just all we have to say is the bad is not a lesson in how we give feedback. None of the 4 C's were covered. And I'm sure that Jacqueline was longing for a more supportive and encouraging leader. And trust me, I do know that because it was me, in case you couldn't tell. So I think about that a lot. And so I want to kind of dig into what would happen next and how we can get better. So for the remainder of this conversation, we're going to spend a little time unpacking 4 C's and share how that we can help with stronger feedback, giving guidance, having it land well, and build trust with our employees. We're going to provide a way to turn that feedback into action. So the first C is curiosity. Let's start with curiosity. When we start with curiosity, we're opening up dialogue. It sounds like questions and exploration rather than an evaluation of what's going on. So when we have dialogue, you can hear how people assess themselves. We can learn their story, a number of things that can happen. So let me give you a little story about a time that I made an assumption, because believe me, I have caught myself making assumptions. And I've even caught myself being annoyed or disappointed by those assumptions that I made before I even know the whole story. There was a time I was sitting in a client meeting watching a top account manager pitch a marketing plan. And I went into that meeting thinking, we've got this, like she's going to kill it. Let's go get it done. But it was quite the contrary. I was watching her present, and she stumbled on her words. She didn't really know what to say when they were asking her questions. It was almost like she was just completely unprepared. She was all over the place. And so I'm sitting here in my brain thinking, she just walked in here thinking she didn't have to prepare and she was going to hit a slam dunk, and that was it. And so we finished the meeting. We go out to the car, my heart's pounding, and I want to say, what the heck happened? I didn't. I just kind of paused there and I just said, go in. How do you think that went? And she surprised me. And she said, you know what, Jacqueline, like, I was in this meeting. I wasn't expecting 8 people to be there. I froze. I couldn't think of my words. I just couldn't focus and I blew it. And I assumed that person had been in this situation before, where she can actually go in and present to a group of folks, but she hadn't. She's been avoiding it her whole career. And so I just told her, how come you didn't mention this before? We're here to help. And she then revealed that at her last company, it wasn't a culture of asking for help. It was almost like if you asked for help, then you weren't good at your job. So by having that dialogue, we learned a lot about each other. We built a plan out of that, and a lot was learned, and we were both better for it. Mike and Raina, have you caught yourself ever making an assumption about a direct report or a peer?
I think it's totally normal. I think we all, because of our experiences, always have these things in the back of their mind about the why something is going the way it's going. And it's just really important. Like, the assumptions will be there. That's natural human behavior. We just have to be really careful about what comes out of our mouth. And I think you handled it really well. It's just to ask the questions to get the full story, because we truly don't know what's going on with somebody and what caused the mishap or what caused something to be less than stellar overall.
I think I struggle with the duration in which I've known the person with the people that I work with. When I look at people that have been at Titus for a long time, I know kind of the good, bad, and ugly of their work product, of, or things that they've said or done in the past. And it does sculpt kind of your assumption of what the work is going to look like and the level of trust that you have. But then on the other side of the coin, I find it to be especially true when it comes to newer people on the team. My initial instinct is to evaluate versus to be curious, and that doesn't lead to good listening. So I really do have to train myself and force myself to listen.
Mm-hmm. And I think if you take the time to ask the questions and be curious, it doesn't matter if you're not truly listening. So just keep in mind that asking the question requires us to then win by really listening and building that trust with the individual. Once we've engaged with curiosity and listened, we're better equipped to give more informed and more relational feedback. So that's a big part of it, is truly understanding the full picture. So we want to ensure in those moments that our feedback is clear, effective feedback is clear. And I do love the quote that's on the slide. It just says, by Brene Brown, it says, "Clear is kind and unclear is unkind." And if you don't know Brene Brown, I highly recommend her podcast. One is called Unlocking Us and the other is called Dare to Lead. They're just really insightful, thought-provoking conversations. But you have to make sure that the feedback you're providing an individual is really about a specific and changeable behavior. We have to ensure that we're really concentrating on the behavior and not the person. I think that's where we can get ourselves in trouble, is making the feedback about the person when it should be for the person. We have to define the problem without leaving the employee guessing about what they need to do to be better in the future. So something you might do is, instead of using generic feedback like, "Oh, you tend to be late for meetings," you might say something like, "Yesterday, you were 10 minutes late for our meeting." So really specific, clear information. Or instead of saying something like, "Your monthly report was lacking," tell them why it was lacking in your perception. So you need to provide numbers for all the teams and clean up the graphs so that we can see the colors contrast from the background on the PowerPoint, whatever that specific clear feedback might be. So transitioning, this is a pretty straightforward one. Be clear, give specifics. Transitioning from clarity to care when providing feedback is crucial to ensure that our feedback is not only understood, but it's really well received and appreciated. So Mike, would you spend some time to speak on care, since you alluded to it earlier when we were chatting?
Yeah, for sure. I think people can tell when you care as a leader, and everybody has different communication styles, but I think the common ground in any communication style is honesty. Honesty equals that you care about them and their development and their growth within an organization, because the truth sets people free, especially when it's done with care. And I think you can do this by reflecting on how you want to show up, right? You need to be real, you need to stay open, but you always state your intention. I like to do that. State my intention of, I want you to be successful. And before diving into the details of that, I'm very transparent with the why behind it. I would prefer to sell someone versus tell them what to do. They need to know what's in it for them. And so then you can follow up with, now that we've discussed the specific points that need improvement, I now want to emphasize that, again, my intention is here to support your growth and your success. So really making sure that you're solidifying that within your communication, because you genuinely do care about their development. It's your job to develop future leaders and future top performers within your organization. And so I know that there's a lot of people that struggle giving feedback. And just remember, it's about being fair and it's about being honest. I think when people are confident that they're right, but they're afraid to give difficult feedback, that is when they just have to lean into their discomfort zone and just go in and tell the truth, right? Being honest with somebody is difficult, but growth is also difficult. I've got 4 little kids. Our most common complaint in the Kinsey household is they've got growing pains, because growing hurts. It hurts in all aspects of life. And we have to expect that from our top performers, and we have to expect that from ourselves, and our teammates need to trust that their managers have their best interests in mind when it comes to growth. And so, just to kind of put a cap on care, I think it shows care when you go directly to the person. It's very easy, especially in the mobile culture right now, to maybe very easily send a quick Teams message or Slack message behind somebody's back and ask for advice, but go to that person. And the ideal way of going about that, especially now, is over video, over the phone, and if possible, face-to-face with that person. That really shows care, because a good majority of communication comes through the nonverbal. And so we want to look in that person's eyes. We want to be able to see their reaction to that, but also show them that you care and that it's genuine care, because that's not easy.
Yeah, I would say, Mike, that the best practice is to not send feedback in a written format until you've had a chance to really share it verbally with the person. Now, depending on your relationship, if you have a relationship, for example, after this session, we're going to sit and we're going to debrief and we're going to give each other some live feedback. However, because we've done this a number of times before, if we didn't have time to meet up after this, I'd be fine with you sending me something written. I know your intent. I know the goal is to help us be better, make sure that we're presenting in the best way possible for our participants. But when you don't have that relationship, I would really make it a priority to share verbal feedback first. To your point, is that there's so much communication tied to our paraverbals and our nonverbal communication. And without those additional communication cues, so much of our message can be lost. Also, people tend to translate messages in the written message in their own way. So if I'm having a hard day and I receive written feedback, I'm going to translate it in the voice that's in my head. If I'm having a great day, maybe the tone in which I translate the feedback is a lot more positive. So you can always follow up with written, because maybe you do want to keep a record of that. And for some reasons, for some people, it might be that you're tracking trends and you're trying to encourage the person over time to grow a new skill set, but it's just not the best way to provide it initially, given that you'll lose that paraverbal, that tone, volume, cadence, and that nonverbal communication.
Yeah, and for anybody that has kids, I heard my daughter struggling with her math homework. And I said, Ava, are you doing okay in there? Do you need some help? And she said, I'm all set. But when I looked at her, she said, I'm all set. Like, okay. And then she followed it up with a written. So I have the note, because she apologized that she had an attitude. So I think it's just, there's so much. She should be on this seminar here, but there's so much that you say with your body and your face and your eyes. And when you care, that's the way it should be, is face to face.
Do you ever feel like, as presenters, we all use our personal stories? It's like when you're a comedian, you do that too. So hopefully we're just being nice, and the people we're speaking with don't actually watch these back.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm amazed at your parenting, that she had the self-awareness to be able to write an apology. You got to teach my kids how to do that too, Jack. That's amazing.
She had a little business agenda, I think. So there was a PS on the note.
That's great. That's great.
Yes.
Before I forget too, there's one more point, is if at all possible, give feedback right away. I think I just look at a lot of relationships where you hold on to something for so long, it impacts that relationship. And it really can water down what you're trying to accomplish if it's weeks later. Once you give that person the feedback, give it to them in the moment. And then you know that you're not holding on to something for so long. And so that leads, I think, Raina, to our next one, the final C of challenge.
Yes. Let me say first that I have so many regrets about the way I delivered feedback early in my career. I always had the courage to provide it, I think, and I do believe I was clear and I was able to ask questions, but I think I sorely lacked in showing care. I definitely did care, but maybe I thought showing compassion or care was more of a weakness. So I think our people deserve to know that we are giving them feedback, and it should be because we want them to be successful. And I think what's wrong with saying that? Like, are really in the back of my mind, what is wrong with us saying, I'm giving you this feedback because I care about you being successful? They should know that and feel that. So let me transition from care to challenge. Again, our final C, when providing feedback, challenge is really about maintaining a balance between showing your concern for the individual and then outlining the areas where improvement or change is really needed for them to be successful. So an effective way to kind of end the conversation when you're providing feedback is to end with a challenge. The conclusion of the feedback session, if you will, is to turn the conversation towards progress and working together to create an actionable plan for improvement. So I just want to consider what might need to look different in the future in that situation. So consider this: when we don't challenge, we basically say that we don't think the person is capable of performing at a higher level. Challenge actually demonstrates respect by showing that we believe in the person's ability to grow. So that might sound like, I want you to know that I genuinely care about your growth and success in this role. So as we move forward, it's important to discuss some ways to take action on this feedback. I think that transition conveys a continued concern and support while setting the stage for addressing how to improve. It definitely maintains a positive and constructive tone while preparing the receiver for the next part of that feedback discussion, which is the challenge. And the challenge, by the way, can sound like getting curious again, because you might ask the question, how might you apply this feedback in the future? Or how might you change your behavior for the next time? Or when can we follow up again? Jack, in your opinion, how does challenge feel different than correction? Because those two things can get a little muddled up.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, challenge to me feels like something I can overcome. So challenge is more focused on growth. It's encouraging, it's collaborative, it's open dialogue rather than the guy, Mr. Thompson, I used to work for. Versus correction, which feels like I'm focusing on errors. I'm going to list everything that you did wrong, right? And it's be more directive than a conversation. That's what it comes down to. Mike, agree?
Yeah, I do. I feel like correcting feels a lot more short term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in that moment, to your point about being challenging, being collaborative, correction feels very one-sided to me.
Yeah. I totally agree with both your ways of thinking. I mean, challenging someone with action on feedback is truly more growth oriented, and it's a collaborative approach that focuses on long-term development, whereas correcting someone is typically a more direct and immediate response to a specific issue or mistake. I mean, both approaches do have their place depending on the context and the goals of the feedback, but challenging with action tends to be a more conducive approach to fostering a culture of continuous improvement and a culture of development. So I think really that's the feedback culture we love to talk about here at Titus, is really that feedback loop. And then what do we do with the feedback once it's been given?
We do love that at Titus. That's the passion that we have and the expertise that we have. And there's just so much more than we can cover here in 30 minutes together. And so this is really what we would call a teaser to the big show, which is a private team session that we could provide for you called Feedback is a Gift. This is, if you're joining us for the first time, the content that we have today is just a snippet of the full Feedback is a Gift session, which is definitely our best selling and highest rated course that we have. We love to host these even privately for companies and really customize this to the different issues or topics that you want us to cover along with that. So that's a big part of this, because the topics that matter the most to you as our partner matter the most to us. And we want to make sure that we can really deliver and help as much as we can as your partner, serve any way that we can. So the QR code here is to get some time with our Director of Learning and Development, Stacy Bowles. She's a rock star. She'll sit with you, make sure that she will get all the information necessary to gather a great amount of information to conduct a feedback as a give session with your teams. She is what we call the queen of talent optimization here. So she'll help you build the highest performing teams. And hopefully we see you soon. For the HR people on the call, you do get 4 SHRM or HRCI credits for that as well.
That's wonderful. And I think what's really important too is this is the last session in the feedback as a gift series of webinars. What we'd love to know from all of you is what should we be talking about next? So if there are topics that you're wishing we would really hit on in some of these, as Mike called them, teaser sessions, we'd love for you just to type it in the chat or to send it to us in a LinkedIn message, or to truly take the time to connect with Stacy, even if it's not about the feedback as a gift session. What else do you want to know? What else can we help you with? It's really interesting because part of my responsibility for our internal learning and development, where Stacy's focused on external learning and development, is to see what our team members are clicking on. And I just pulled up my reporting yesterday, and this is actually one of the #1 topics that our managers are asking for. They're clicking on topics like how to have a difficult conversation or how to deliver feedback. And the third one is how to delegate so that we could elevate. So there are all sorts of topics that we kind of know our people are looking for. We want to hear from all of you because you are our partners out there. We want to make sure we're delivering the things that you need. Now, while we didn't have any questions come in through the webinar itself, the chat feature itself, we have delivered this feedback as a gift series to our partners. And there is a common question, Mike, I was hoping that you could answer that's kind of outside of this, but related to the topic. But how can, because of your expertise in PI, but how can we tailor our feedback to individual team members who have different communication styles and personalities?
Ooh, that's good. Yeah. There's a lot of different nuances there, because I think what people usually get afraid of with an assessment is that it's going to judge them and that they get put into a box. When in reality, it should be leveraged as a way to better communicate with one another. And if you've got self-awareness as a manager, you should be accommodating your style to that person and what they need. And I learned that the hard way. I've got somebody on my team who is very patient, does not like change. I'm the opposite of that. And so I was throwing things on him and noticed he was getting dejected and frustrated. And I had a conversation proactively with him and basically had to say, I'm going to be giving you a lot of change, but why don't we build some boxes and parameters for when that change happens so that this can be familiar to you, right? And so that's one example. Same with people who are more introverted. Make sure you're sending them an agenda ahead of a meeting so they have time to process and think before jumping in and you expecting you and your extroverted self that they're going to want to talk things through. So there's a lot of different ways that we can go about tailoring the feedback that we provide based on what those natural needs of that individual are.
And then Jack, you referenced this a little bit earlier with the story with Mr. Thompson, your brother's cousin, sister's boyfriend, dad. But you referenced this earlier, like you mentioned the whole getting called into the office. This is a big question I get from people out there when they're managing others is, how do I set the stage? If I can't give them feedback immediately, but I know they need to get it, how do I set up a meeting agenda? Should I say what I want to talk about? Should I put it in the meeting notice? And I think that's the right thing to do. You really want people to come being prepared to answer a question. So a lot of times what I'll do is more of this self-assessment, really using the self-assessment piece as part of the feedback process. So for example, if Mike is wanting to have a conversation with me, he might put in an email, hey, what we're going to be talking about today during this 30 minutes is your feedback as a gift session 3. What I'd like for you to come thinking about is maybe 2 or 3 things you did really well and 2 or 3 things that you could do differently for next time. So it encourages somebody to come having processed the situation. I also have found over my years of working with people that when you give them a chance to assess themselves, likely they're going to uncover similar things to what you uncovered. And it makes it so much easy for you to then give the feedback because you're agreeing. And where there is a gap, that's okay too. That's part of self-discovery. Now the goal is how to kind of fill that gap. So creating an agenda for people to give them time to process is really, really helpful.
Right.
One more question that came from a partner that we had recently too is really talking about that nonverbal cues for body language. So Jack, I'm going to push this to you first, but could you provide a few examples of how some nonverbal cues or body language could really help enhance the impact of feedback or how we could use that more effectively?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing from the manager side or the person that's giving the feedback is that you are investing 100% of your attention to this conversation. There's nothing worse than having a conversation and someone's looking off to the side. You can tell they're distracted. I mean, it's just one of those things that you're like, okay, well, where are we going here? I think the other thing is to give a little bit at a time and pause and let that person receive it. If you give them a long list like Mr. Thompson did to Jacqueline back in the day, it was just completely overwhelming. And there was nothing that I really was retaining, right? So it's taking your time, it's being intentional and specific and doing nothing but focusing on this person.
Good. And we talk a lot about nonverbal cues, but we don't talk a ton about paraverbal. I did mention that earlier. Just thinking about how you're saying the words that you say. So tone, volume, cadence, all of those things really play into the conversation. So being really intentional with what your voice is doing, that also shows care in that moment.
Right.
Right. Well, those were a few of the questions that we've seen come from partners following our sessions. And so that really concludes our webinar today. We're so appreciative of all of you that were able to join. We had a lot of people sign up, and so we'll be sending the recording out if you weren't able to make it. We know how busy schedules can get. We so appreciate you being here. We're looking forward to new topics in the coming months or even into the new year. So please let us know what you'd want to hear from us, and we will create some learnings and webinar topics around it. Thank you for your time. And Jack, thank you so much for joining us again. And Mike, I think people are tired of seeing our faces. I'll do a shoulder shrug on who's going to be coming next.
Agreed.
I'd love to come again.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks.